Advanced reading passage explained with easier way. Title: Tea and the Industrial Revolution. A Cambridge professor says that a change in drinking habits was the reason for the Industrial Revolution in Britain. Anjana Abuja reports. Beginner level. A professor from Cambridge University believes that people changing what they drank helped start the Industrial Revolution in Britain. Paragraph A. Alan McFarlane, Professor of Anthropological Science at King's College, Cambridge has, like other historians, spent decades wrestling with the enigma of the Industrial Revolution. Beginner level. Alan McFarlane, a professor at Cambridge, has studied the mystery of why the Industrial Revolution happened. Why did this particular Big Bang, the world-changing birth of industry, happen in Britain? And why did it strike at the end of the 18th century? Beginner level. He wonders why this big change in industry happened in Britain and why it started around the late 1700s. Paragraph B. McFarlane compares the puzzle to a combination lock. Beginner level. He says the answer is like a lock that needs the right combination to open. There are about 20 different factors and all of them need to be present before the revolution can happen. He says. Beginner level. He says around 20 things had to happen at the same time for the Industrial Revolution to begin. For industry to take off, there needs to be the technology and power to drive factories, large urban populations to provide cheap labor, easy transport to move goods around, an affluent middle class willing to buy mass-produced objects, a market-driven economy and a political system that allows this to happen. Beginner level. These important things were needed. Machines and power for factories, lots of people in cities for work, good transport to move products, rich people who wanted to buy things, a business-friendly economy and government, while this was the case for England. Other nations, such as Japan, the Netherlands and France also met some of these criteria but were not industrializing. Beginner level. England had these things, but Japan, the Netherlands, and France also had some of them, yet they didn't start the Industrial Revolution. All these factors must have been necessary, but not sufficient to cause the revolution, says McFarlane. Beginner level. These things were needed, but not enough on their own to cause the Industrial Revolution. After all, Holland had everything except coal, while China also had many of these factors. Most historians are convinced there are one or two missing factors that you need to open the lock. Single quote. Beginner level. For example, Holland had everything except coal, and China also had many important things. Historians believe one or two more things were missing. Paragraph C. The missing factors, he proposes, are to be found in almost every kitchen cupboard. Tea and beer, two of the nation's favorite drinks, fueled the revolution. Beginner level. He says the missing reason is very simple. Tea and beer helped start the revolution. The antiseptic properties of tannin, the active ingredient in tea, and of hops in beer, plus the fact that both are made with boiled water, allowed urban communities to flourish at close quarters without succumbing to water-borne diseases such as dysentery. Beginner level. Tea and beer are both clean and kill bacteria. Because tea contains tannin, a natural germ killer, beer contains hops, also germ killing. Both are made with boiled water. This helped people live close together without getting sick from dirty water. Like with dysentery, The theory sounds eccentric, but once he starts to explain the detective work that went into his deduction, the skepticism gives way to wary admiration. Beginner level. This idea may sound strange at first, but when he explains how he found it, people start to respect it. McFarlane's case has been strengthened by support from notable quarters. Roy Porter, the distinguished medical historian, recently wrote a favorable appraisal of his research. Beginner level. Famous experts like Roy Porter, a respected medical historian, also support McFarlane's theory. Paragraph D. McFarlane had wondered for a long time how the Industrial Revolution came about. Beginner level. He had thought about this mystery for many years. Historians had alighted on one interesting factor around the mid-18th century that required explanation. Beginner level. Historians noticed something strange around the mid-1700s that needed to be explained. Between about 1650 and 1740, the population in Britain was static. But then there was a burst in population growth. Beginner level. From 1650 to 1740, the number of people in Britain stayed the same. After that, the population grew quickly. McFarlane says, the infant mortality rate halved in the space of 20 years. And this happened in both rural areas and cities, and across all classes. Beginner level. He says that the number of babies dying dropped by half in just 20 years in both cities and the countryside. And in rich and poor families. People suggested 4 possible causes. Was there a sudden change in the viruses and bacteria around? Unlikely. Was there a revolution in medical science? But this was a century before Lister's revolution. Beginner level. Some thought it might be a change in diseases, but that's not likely. Better medicine, but this was 100 years before good medical science. Was there a change in environmental conditions? There were improvements in agriculture that wiped out malaria, but these were small gains. Beginner level. There were some better farming methods that reduced malaria, but it wasn't a big improvement. Sanitation did not become widespread until the 19th century. Beginner level. Clean toilets and water systems were not common until the 1800s. The only option left is food, but the height and weight statistics show a decline. So the food must have got worse. Beginner level. Maybe better food helped, but records show that people were shorter and lighter, meaning food quality actually got worse. Efforts to explain this sudden reduction in child deaths appeared to draw a blank. Beginner level. So historians couldn't explain why infant deaths suddenly dropped. Paragraph E. This population burst seemed to happen at just the right time to provide labor for the Industrial Revolution. Beginner level. The increase in people happened at the perfect time to supply workers for the new factories. When you start moving towards an industrial revolution, it is economically efficient to have people living close together, says McFarlane. But then you get disease, particularly from human waste. Single quote. Beginner level. In industry, it's cheaper if people live in crowded cities, but this also spreads diseases, especially from dirty toilets and waste. Some digging around in historical records revealed that there was a change in the incidence of waterborne disease at that time, especially dysentery. Beginner level. Historical records showed that water-related diseases, like dysentery, were less common at that time. McFarlane deduced that whatever the British were drinking must have been important regulating disease. Beginner level, he guessed that what people were drinking helped reduce these diseases. He says, "We drank beer for a long time. The English were protected by the strong antibacterial agent in hops, which were added to help preserve the beer. Beginner level, people mostly drank beer, and hops in beer helped kill bacteria. But in the late 17th century a tax was introduced on malt, the basic ingredient of beer." Beginner level, around the late 1600s, the government put a tax on malt, which is needed to make beer. The poor turned to water and gin, and in the 1720s the mortality rate began to rise again. Then it suddenly dropped again. What caused this? Single quote, beginner level, because beer became expensive. Poor people drank water and gin, and more people started dying again. Then suddenly the death rate dropped again. Why? Paragraph F. McFarlane looked to Japan, which was also developing large cities about the same time, and also had no sanitation. Beginner level, he studied Japan, which also had big cities and no clean sanitation at the time. Waterborne diseases had a much looser grip on the Japanese population than those in Britain. Beginner level, but fewer Japanese people got sick from dirty water compared to the British. Could it be the prevalence of tea in their culture? Beginner level, was this because Japanese people drank tea? McFarlane then noted that the history of tea in Britain provided an extraordinary coincidence of dates. Beginner level, he found that the history of tea in Britain matched important time periods. Tea was relatively expensive until Britain started a direct clipper trade with China in the early 18th century. Beginner level, tea was expensive until Britain began direct shipping with China in the early 1700s. By the 1740s, about the time that infant mortality was dipping, the drink was common. Beginner level, by the 1740s, when fewer babies were dying, tea had become common. McFarlane guessed that the fact that water had to be boiled, together with the stomach purifying properties of tea, meant that the breast milk provided by mothers was healthier than it had ever been. Beginner level, because tea required boiled water and had health benefits. Mothers became healthier and produced cleaner breast milk. No other European nation sipped tea like the British, which, by McFarlane's logic, pushed these other countries out of contention for the revolution. Beginner level, other countries didn't drink tea like the British did. So, according to him, they missed this health advantage and couldn't start the revolution. Paragraph G. But, if tea is a factor in the combination lock, why didn't Japan forge ahead in a tea-soaked industrial revolution of its own? Beginner level, if tea helped Britain, why didn't Japan also have an industrial revolution? McFarlane notes that even though 17th century Japan had large cities, high literacy rates, even a futures market, it had turned its back on the essence of any work-based revolution by giving up labor-saving devices such as animals, afraid that they would put people out of work. Beginner level, Japan had many modern things like cities, education, and trade, but they refused to use machines or animals because they feared it would take away jobs. So, the nation that we now think of as one of the most technologically advanced entered the 19th century having abandoned the wheel. Beginner level, so even though Japan is very modern now, Back then they were against progress, they even stopped using wheels.